Hey guys, tonight we drift down the Nile on perfumed waters, the air thick with frankincense and something sharper, something that smells a little like victory and a little like venom. Above you, sails ripple like silk handkerchiefs. Beneath your sandals, gold leafwood creaks with every footstep. You're not just on a boat, you're in Cleopatra's floating theater, and every corner of it is dripping with seduction, strategy, and possibly just a pinch of poison. A flute sighs in the background. Lotus petals swirl in shallow bowls of water. Parrots imported from India shriek something unintelligible before remembering their training and falling silent. The Nile stretches ahead like a mirror, catching the stars, the city's fires, and your own overwhelmed expression. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't know it yet, but you've just stepped aboard the royal barge of Cleopatra VII Philopator, last pharaoh of Egypt, certified polyglot, unchallenged charm champion, and, fun fact, a makeup enthusiast who might have been slowly poisoning herself with her eyeliner. That glittery Galena Cole? Yes, beautiful. Also, toxic in large doses. Cleopatra didn't exactly have a CVS, so she made do with lead sulfide and crushed beetles. The results were devastating in every sense. You're shown to your seat by a servant who doesn't speak but definitely judges you. And then she appears. Cleopatra doesn't just walk into a room. She occupies it like she's the gravitational center of the known world. Tonight, her dress is woven gold thread, actual gold, not golden colored. Her headdress is more than symbolic, it's terrifying. A cobra curls up from her brow, crafted in metal, yes, but designed to remind you of what lives in the reeds. And her perfume hits you first, blue lotus, myrrh, cinnamon bark, and something so ancient it might just be the smell of ambition itself. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra was physically beautiful in the classical sense. Roman accounts, suspiciously petty, love to downplay her looks while hyping her mind. But beauty isn't the point. You don't look away because it would be politically stupid and personally impossible. She sits beside you, pours you wine herself, yes, really, and you're instantly off balance. Her questions are both invasive and flattering. Do you always squint like that, or are you worried about me? She purrs. You laugh too loudly. You're sweating. She's not. This whole barge, you realize, is a stage. Plutarch wrote that she once greeted Mark Antony dressed as Aphrodite herself. That she arrived in a boat with silver oars, purple sails, and servants dressed as mythological figures. Was it true? Maybe. Or maybe it was the best PR campaign in history. Cleopatra understood the power of a good story and how to control the narrator. You sip your wine. It tastes faintly of honey and something else, something that reminds you that the Ptolemies were Greek but never quite forgot Egypt's older, stranger gods. There's a hieroglyph on the cup. It means life, but the way she looks at you, you wonder if it might also mean trap. A cat slinks across the deck, stares into your soul, and vanishes again. That's Baudet, Cleopatra murmurs. She doesn't like many people. You try to say something clever. It doesn't go well. And just when you think you've survived the evening, there's a loud splash. No one reacts. That's when you know this is normal. A small crocodile surfaces beside the barge, eyes gleaming like polished stones. It floats there, watching. Cleopatra doesn't miss a beat. That one's for the unfaithful, she says sweetly, sipping her wine again. And the overly ambitious. You're now both sober and slightly terrified. She gestures toward the torches on the shore. You see, Egypt must be more than powerful. It must be unforgettable. Then she leans in just close enough that you forget every language you ever knew. And so must I. This isn't flirtation. This is weaponized charisma. Cleopatra doesn't need an army to conquer, just a look, a line, and a legend. At some point, someone tries to play a harp, but the strings snap dramatically mid-song. No one panics. Cleopatra simply smiles. Even the music bows to me. You find out later the harpist's instrument was strung with dried sinew from an ibex sacrificed at dawn. Because of course it was. This isn't a date. It's a performance art piece directed by a woman who dreams in allegory. As the barge returns to the palace, you catch your reflection in the Nile, flushed, bedazzled, and very possibly in love. Or is it fear? Hard to tell. She's already looking away, giving someone else the full solar flare of her attention. One last detail before you go, Cleopatra didn't just rely on charisma. Her barge was allegedly rigged to release aromatic smoke through pipes and vents, sending the air in clouds of exotic perfume. You were never just breathing air, you were inhaling her brand. Now, as the palace looms ahead, its torches dancing like fireflies, you wonder if you'll ever feel that normal again. Spoiler, you won't. Once you've seen Cleopatra on her own terms, everyone else is just beige. You wake in a chamber that smells faintly of papyrus and panic. The bed is too soft, the silence too deliberate. Somewhere, a scribe is already recording what you have for breakfast, because nothing, and I mean nothing, around Cleopatra is ever just a casual Tuesday. She appears before you've even had time to rehearse a clever remark. Today, she's draped in linen so fine it could pass for mist. No jewelry. No fanfare. Just a scroll under one arm and a grin that suggests you're about to be taught something you didn't ask to learn. Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Median, and Egyptian, she ticks off, almost absent-mindedly. And a little Nubian, but I'm rusty. Then she raises one eyebrow. How's your demonic script these days? You smile. Weakly. Cleopatra didn't just dabble in languages. She weaponized them. Unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, who thought Egyptian was fine for peasants and priests but not for rulers, she actually learned to speak it fluently. That alone gave her instant street cred with the people. She was the first of her line to address the masses in their own tongue. Not just symbolism. Strategy. Words, she tells you, unrolling the scroll, can cross borders faster than armies, and with far less laundry. She pauses. Although, to be fair, I do love a uniform. The scroll contains a diplomatic letter. Cleopatra reads it aloud in Latin, then Greek, then Egyptian. Same message, wildly different tone in each. In Greek, she's witty. In Latin, she's precise. In Egyptian, she's maternal. The shift is subtle, surgical. Historians still argue whether she truly mastered all these tongues or simply surrounded herself with the best interpreters money could buy. But you watch her correct a minor translation error in Phoenician and decide, yeah, she probably spoke it all. You follow her into the palace's eastern wing, where the marble floors are scuffed with the dreams of failed envoys. A Nubian diplomat bows low, his robe dusted with desert salt. They converse rapidly in his language. You catch none of it, except the soft laughter that follows. Apparently, Cleopatra just told a joke. It involves a hippo, a priest, and a very unfortunate sandal. Later, she pulls you into a corner of the palace where the breeze filters through sheer curtains and the floor is littered with cushions and scrolls. She flops down dramatically, like someone who has just conquered a small kingdom for fun. Most men come to court with swords, she says. I come with verbs. You try to compliment her linguistic prowess, but she waves it off. Speaking well is expected. Listening well, that's the rare art. She tells you about a time she stalled a potential rebellion simply by letting the leader rant for 2 hours straight. He talked himself into defeat. Glorious. One of the palace cats walks across a scroll. She pretends to scold it in ancient Egyptian, and the cat sits down smugly, like it's won an argument. You can't tell if this was staged. You don't ask. You find out Cleopatra trained her staff in multiple languages, too. She hated relying solely on translators. Too easy to lose nuance, or to be misquoted on purpose. She once fired a scribe mid-negotiation for misusing the word for tribute. Or was it gift? Those two words get tangled easily when one's entire empire is on the line. You visit the royal classroom, a sunlit alcove with maps of the known world, lined with wax tablets, stacked with reeds and inks. She studied rhetoric under masters, practiced debate like it was fencing. Rumor has it, she could argue both sides of a case so convincingly that even the judges forgot which side she was on. And she doesn't just speak languages, she plays with them. During one conversation with a Gallic trader, she casually slips into a bizarre blend of Egyptian syntax and Gaulish vocabulary just to watch him sweat. He ends up offering her more grain than his manifest listed. She calls it linguistic disarmament. Over lunch, grapes, honey cakes, something suspiciously fishy wrapped in vine leaves, she quizzes you. How do you say power in your language? You answer. She nods, then says it back, perfect accent, even better smirk. Now, she says, stretching like a cat full of secrets, how do I say it better? A serving girl trips. Cleopatra catches the plate before it hits the floor. Doesn't blink. Still talking about power. You realize this seduction isn't about beauty or spectacle, not today. Today, it's about making you feel like the cleverest person in the room, right up until she opens her mouth and reminds you you're just a well-dressed prop in her very verbal theater. But here's the thing, Cleopatra doesn't hoard brilliance. She reflects it. When you speak, she tilts her head, locks eyes, and listens as if your words are being carved into temple walls. It's heady stuff. You're suddenly funnier, sharper, more interesting. Or at least, you feel that way. Which, in this palace, is the same thing. Later, as you wander out blinking into the late afternoon sun, you pass a statue that wasn't there this morning. It's her likeness, holding a scroll in one hand, a papyrus flower in the other. At her feet, an inscription in 7 languages, all saying the same thing, Queen of the Word and the Sword. You wonder who wrote it. You also wonder if you're still thinking in your native tongue or if Cleopatra rewired your brain while you weren't looking. Either way, you're impressed. And just a little nervous. It's hot. Not the pleasant, sun-warmed kind of hot, but the am I baking inside my own skull sort. Welcome to the royal courtyard of Alexandria, circa 60 BCE, where teenage Cleopatra isn't lounging with figs and philosophy. No, she's plotting survival while sweating in state-approved linen and trying not to die before puberty finishes doing its thing. You're standing in the shade of a palm tree that looks like it gave up centuries ago. The royal siblings, yes, plural, are arguing again. Cleopatra is maybe 15, maybe younger, and already better at lying through her teeth than most politicians will be in their prime. Smile like you're agreeing, she whispers to you, not looking up from the game board on her lap. Then nod like you're planning murder. You try. She side-eyes your effort. Close enough. This is the part they skip in the marble statues and epic poems. The part with moldy grapes, whisper campaigns, and brothers who are too much gold and not enough common sense. Cleopatra's family tree isn't so much a tree as a tangled grapevine that strangled itself on purpose. Ptolemaic tradition, after all, leaned hard into sibling marriages, like really leaned, fell over, and rolled around in it. Political unity, they said. Familial trust, they said. Awkward dinner conversations, you discover. The real kicker? Cleopatra co-ruled with 2 of her brothers over her lifetime, one of whom she probably had removed via a method the royal crocodile may or may not have been involved in. Historians still argue whether Ptolemy XIII drowned by accident in the Nile or was gently nudged under by fate, and maybe a few guards with nervous grins. But right now, she's just a sharp-eyed teenager trying to stay alive long enough to become legendary. And the palace? It's a jumble in marble clothing. You follow her down a corridor lined with murals of gods devouring enemies and cats wearing more jewelry than you could afford in 3 lifetimes. Each painting is a lie, she tells you. But a useful one. She runs her fingers across the wall as if feeling for a secret passage. She doesn't find one, but the metaphor sticks. One moment she's translating Persian trade documents, the next she's throwing figs at her cousin because he said something stupid about Babylon. You try to keep up, but palace life is like a chessboard on fire. If you're not moving, you're melting. One of her tutors, a man with eyebrows like ferrets and a permanent scowl, challenges her on a point of law. She pauses, smiles, and proceeds to quote the ruling of an obscure Greek magistrate from memory. Then she adds, "But of course, if we used Egyptian law, you'd be exiled by now." Oof. You later find out she was writing speeches for her father, Ptolemy XII, long before she had her own throne. Daddy Dearest, nicknamed Alitz or the flute player, wasn't exactly a model of regal composure. Rome kind of hated him, Egypt kind of tolerated him, and Cleopatra? She studied him like a textbook on what not to do. There's a scroll tucked under her bed with sketches of the Roman Senate, faces, notes, weak points. She keeps it next to a dried rose and a slingshot. In the garden, you meet one of her informants. He's disguised as a gardener but can quote Cicero. He gives Cleopatra an update on who's been bribed lately and by whom. She listens, nods, then asks him to trim the myrtle bush because it's getting emotionally unbalanced. This is what teenage rebellion looks like when you're Cleopatra. Not sneaking out at night. Not sulking through poetry. But shaping your face into a mask of grace and talking circles around grown men with real swords and very fragile egos. One afternoon, she asks you to play a game called Queen's Gambit. It's like chess, only the queen piece can also change the rules mid-game. You lose horribly. "You're not bad," she says, "you're just predictable." She shows you her daily schedule, less a timetable and more a war plan. Half the palace believes she's just studying botany or religious rites. The truth? She's memorizing supply routes, watching Roman grain prices, and learning how to curse someone with just the right combination of herbs and Greek adjectives. Oh, and animals. Always animals. There's a hawk in her chambers. It doesn't belong to her. It just showed up one day and hasn't left. She feeds it meat from her hand. It trusts her. You try to pet it and it almost pecks your eyeball. "That's a good sign," she says. One day, a courtier underestimates her. Makes a snide remark about her accent in front of a foreign envoy. Cleopatra smiles, thanks him for his candor, and later publicly gives him a tunic that matches the color of cowardice. Everyone laughs. The courtier turns pale. The envoy nods approvingly. You realize then that Cleopatra isn't growing into power, she's already wielding it. Quietly. Strategically. Like someone practicing swordplay with invisible blades. She's got a diary, don't ask how you saw it, that contains more strategy than sentiment. One page is devoted to Roman weaknesses. Another to which flowers survive longest in drought. It reads less like a teenage girl's journal and more like the soft notes of a future queen. Before the sun sets, she drags you up to the roof to watch the city burn gold. One day, she says, they'll rewrite this part of my life. She smiles. I plan to make it difficult for them. You don't know what to say. But the hawk flies by again, silent, sharp, and Cleopatra doesn't flinch. You're standing in the harbor of Alexandria, and you can smell ambition, salt water, oil, ink, and just the faintest trace of flaming sandalwood. It's still early, but Cleopatra's already 2 meetings deep, And you're just trying not to get trampled by a camel wearing a necklace worth more than your house. Today is not about books or baby snakes or multilingual wordplay. Today is about one thing, the entrance. The first time Cleopatra stages an appearance, not a mere stroll through the palace but a full-on public spectacle. It's not a parade. It's a sermon delivered in the language of awe. You see, she understands that power isn't just about holding court. It's about entering a room like it owes you tribute. She doesn't just walk into a space. She emerges. From curtains, from shadows, from smoke, sometimes. And always with just enough delay to make people nervous. You're told to wait at the temple of Isis where she's holding an open audience. The temple smells like a combination of jasmine and centuries of whispered secrets. The priests glance at you sideways, like you're a scroll someone forgot to burn. Suddenly, bells. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 soft chimes. You hear murmurs. Someone bows so low their forehead kisses the marble. Then, through the silken drapery, a flash of gold, and there she is, Cleopatra VII, dressed not as a Ptolemy, but as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. Not metaphorically. She's wearing the iconography, crown, scepter, that weirdly intimidating cobra circlet. Her makeup is sharp enough to etch a commandment into stone. But her eyes? They twinkle like she knows you've seen 5 other queens try this exact stunt and fail miserably. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra actually believed herself divine or just found the divine status extremely convenient. Either way, the result's the same. The people believed it. You believe it. Even the pigeons pause. It's not just costume, it's choreography. As she glides forward, musicians time their rhythm to her steps. Every gesture is paced, calculated. You want to check your pulse, but you're not sure it's your own anymore. And then she speaks. Not loudly. Not in Egyptian either. Today, it's pure Greek. It rolls off her tongue like honey poured onto polished marble. She's addressing scholars, traders, the occasional bored donkey. But every sentence ends in applause. You don't even know what she's saying, but you're clapping. Enthusiastically. She catches your eye for half a second. Just enough to remind you, yes, you're here, and yes, this is the moment you'll compare every other grand entrance to, forever. Later, in her private quarters, she flops down into a pile of cushions and groans. That headdress, she says, pulling off the cobra circlet, is an absolute migraine. She tosses it at you. It's heavier than it looks. Power tip, never let them see you sweat. Her staff brings in a platter of figs carved into the shape of lotus blossoms. One falls apart. Cleopatra sighs dramatically. I told them, more stem structure. Nobody listens to the queen anymore. That's the thing about her entrances. They're illusions. Crafted. Maintained. Swept away the moment she's out of view, because she knows the real seduction isn't in what you wear, it's in how you own it. Flashback. She once entered a courtroom trial disguised as a common petitioner. No gold, no coal, no guards. just a rolled up scroll and a smile. She spoke so calmly, so convincingly, that by the end, the judge had ruled in her favor and invited her to dinner. He never found out he just reversed a verdict against the actual queen. And let's not forget the infamous carpet stunt. You're in the room when the idea is born. She's pacing. Julius Caesar has taken Alexandria. Her brother's people are blocking access. She's persona non grata. What to do? A whisper of a grin. What if I wasn't me? You blink. What if I'm a gift? Hours later, you watch as Cleopatra, swaddled tightly inside an expensive rug, some versions say a laundry sack, but we prefer the cinematic version, is hauled into Caesar's private quarters. By the time the rug's unfurled, she's upright, regal, already speaking. Probably in Latin. Possibly in flirt. The Romans say she walked out of that meeting with alliances, and maybe more. But the only confirmed fact is, the entrance worked. Again. Did she rehearse it? Definitely. Did she risk death? Oh, without a doubt. But Cleopatra's always known, drama without danger is just amateur theater. You think back to her first real audience with the Alexandrian elite. Not a single jewel on her. Just a linen gown and a scroll quoting Egyptian tax law. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. She quoted the law, amended the tax, and walked out with 3 new allies and a lot of very quiet nobles. Even the royal barge, yes, that floating temple of excess she sailed down the Nile with, is more than a pleasure cruise. It's pageantry with a purpose. Gold sails, silver oars, perfume diffused by invisible fans, and music that made even the crocodiles stop judging for a second. Plutarch says she made it a point to arrive late. Just enough to make hearts pound. Not so late it seemed careless. That exact timing? Practiced. Modeled. Rehearsed like battle strategy. There's one moment burned into your memory, a night festival on the Nile. Cleopatra appears not by boat, but on a floating platform shaped like a lotus. Lit from beneath. As she drifts past, you hear someone whisper, "Is that her?" Another person, it must be. She turns slightly, lets the flame light catch her face, then disappears into the mist. That's it. That's the whole performance. For seconds. You'll never forget it. Later that night, back in her quarters, she burps. Loudly. Too many figs, she mutters. Queen or not, she's human. But don't expect her to act like it when people are watching. That's the difference between power and presence. One you inherit. The other you create. And Cleopatra? She creates it in every entrance. Every glance. Every flick of her wrist. Even now, as she stands barefoot on her palace balcony, hair down, wine in hand, no crowd to impress, she still carries it. That impossible weight of theatrical royalty. She sees you watching. Raises an eyebrow. Don't just stand there, she says. Start clapping. There's a lion in the courtyard. No, not a metaphorical one. A literal lion. Golden, sleepy, and watching you with the unsettling calm of something that's already decided if you're worth chasing. Don't move, Cleopatra whispers from behind a column. He's digesting. You nod. Slowly. Because in Cleopatra's Alexandria, wildlife isn't just decoration, it's part of the performance. The queen doesn't merely stage an empire with statues and soldiers. She uses creatures. Unpredictable, majestic, and occasionally venomous creatures. Back inside the palace, there's a monkey wearing a gold collar chewing on a scroll. You suspect that scroll was important. Cleopatra doesn't seem fazed. That was just a draft, she says. I think he made improvements. You call this chaos, but to her, it's choreography. Every animal in Cleopatra's palace serves a purpose. The hawk from her rooftop? It's trained to recognize her voice. The crocodile in the moat? Not just rumor. You see it for yourself one morning, basking beside a sun-drenched lily pad, eyes half-lidded, like it knows exactly whose moat it is. His name's Hecate, Cleopatra says, tossing in a hunk of meat. We're on decent terms. Don't step on him. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's use of animals was symbolic, strategic, or just part of a particularly eccentric lifestyle. But one thing's for sure, she knew the psychological power of the unexpected. Imagine you're a visiting diplomat. You expect marble columns and veiled threads. Instead, you're greeted by a white peacock that hisses when you bow too shallow. Or a falcon that lands near your plate and stares through your soul until your political position suddenly softens. One time, a foreign prince tried to impress Cleopatra by gifting her a panther. Within a week, she trained it to sit on her throne beside her. You can still see the scratches in the marble. But it's not all spectacle. Some of these creatures are deeply entwined in religious symbolism. The ibis, the ESP, the scarab beetle, they're not pets. They're icons. Living avatars of gods and ideas. Cleopatra didn't invent that, of course, but she did weaponize it. Like that time she appeared in court with a black cat draped across her shoulders. The symbolism? Protection, femininity, mystery. The effect? Half the room suddenly remembered they owed her favors. In private, though, she's a bit more relaxed. You once watched her try to teach a parrot to recite poetry. It mostly just shrieked Ptolemy sucks at dinner guests for a week before she traded it for a quieter companion, a chameleon named Aristotle. She's not collecting these animals because she's lonely. She's curating an atmosphere. A living museum of power and whimsy where each creature plays its part in the larger illusion that Cleopatra is more than human. That she's in harmony with nature, the gods, and fate itself. Even the more exotic choices have stories. There's a story, one of those too good to be true ones, that she once gifted Mark Antony a horse trained to bow at her name. When he tried to ride it, it threw him into a fountain. Cleopatra, of course, claimed innocence. Perhaps he needed to learn humility, she said, sipping wine. You helped feed the stables once. Mistake. The zebra bites. Cleopatra laughs for 5 minutes straight and then makes you chief grain measurer for the week as punishment. But amidst the laughter, there's something deeper. You see it in her private temple, where a cobra rests in a small, ornate cage, coiled like a waiting thought. You ask her if it's the famous ASP, the one from that story. She tilts her head. Not yet, she says. One night, during a storm, a leopard escapes. Panic erupts. Servants screaming. Guards with spears running the wrong direction. You find Cleopatra alone in the garden, sitting perfectly still. The leopard is there, mere feet away. Growling. She doesn't flinch. She raises one hand, fingers poised like a silent spell. The leopard growls once more, then lies down. Later, she shrugs. Sometimes, she says, you just have to let them believe you're the bigger predator. That's the real trick, isn't it? The animals aren't props. They're mirrors. They reflect the world back at itself, wild, untamable, majestic. Just like Cleopatra wants to be seen. Maybe even just like she is. There's a crocodile dung jar on her shelf. Don't ask why you opened it. Let's just say it's part of an ancient beauty ritual, and the scent is unforgettable. Cleopatra notices your face. It works, she insists. Painfully. Quirky details like that stick with you. Like how she won't walk near her parrot's cage when wearing green. He thinks I'm basil and tries to eat my earrings, she explains with a sigh that suggests she's tried reasoning with it. Several times. You help prepare a diplomatic feast once, and part of the entertainment? A trained mongoose that performs dances to flute music. Apparently, it's also a snake killer. Cleopatra beams with pride when it nails a perfect spin. And let's not forget the aquatic guests. Her private bath has fish, tiny, colorful, and reportedly enchanted to swim in patterns that match her mood. You try staring at them to see if that's true. They form a skull shape. She's watching from behind the curtain. Kidding, she says. Probably. When you ask her why so many animals, she gives a small smile. Humans bore me. Animals tell the truth. Maybe that's the answer. In a palace full of spies, liars, and double dealers, at least the lion doesn't pretend to like you unless it means it. You hear a rumor that she once kept a pair of cobras named Caesar and Pompey. She neither confirms nor denies. The cobras don't talk, she says. Which is more than I can say for Roman envoys. The animals fade into the tapestry of her life. Ever present. Ever watching. Proof that Cleopatra's world doesn't play by normal rules. It hisses. It purrs. It prowls in the shadows just beyond reason. And tonight, as you walk through the dim garden under moonlight, you see those golden lion eyes again. Watching. Just like Cleopatra taught them to. The marble floor is cold under your bare feet. Somewhere outside, a flute plays a lazy lullaby, probably to calm the palace crocodile after another diplomatic dinner gone sideways. But inside Cleopatra's private library, It's all parchment, oil lamps, and a queen lounging upside down on a divan, reading aloud from a scroll on venom extraction techniques. I like the part where they milk the vipers, she says, dangling one foot in the air. Such delicate work. You'd be terrible at it. You probably would. But this isn't a normal night. Tonight, you're getting a glimpse of Cleopatra's secret arsenal, not weapons or armies, but language, stories, rumors, and the curious kind of knowledge that makes powerful men squirm in their sandals. You see, Cleopatra seduces minds as well as hearts. And that means she reads. Constantly. Not just Egyptian and Greek texts, but Persian philosophy, Roman political treatises, obscure Hittite poetry, and once, memorably, a Babylonian recipe for aphrodisiac tea involving powdered locust wings. Not bad with cinnamon, she insists. She reads not to impress but to prepare. Because when Cleopatra speaks, she doesn't throw words like spears. She sets them down like traps. Beautiful ones. With honey bait. You saw it last week when a Roman envoy, one of Caesar's stiffer leftovers, dared to challenge her interpretation of a treaty. He quoted a single Latin clause with all the grace of a sleep-deprived goat. Cleopatra let him finish, nodded solemnly, and then corrected his syntax in Latin, with a smile that could fossilize a man mid-sentence. Historians still argue whether she was formally educated in rhetoric, but it's clear she studied under the best scholars in Alexandria, and more importantly, practiced on anyone who wandered too close. There's this myth that Cleopatra used only beauty to enchant. Let's retire that right now. Sure, she was striking. But her true magic? The way she listened. The way she responded. You'd confess state secrets just to hear her say in that tone that made you feel both flattered and slightly roasted. One time, a visiting philosopher tried to debate her on Stoic ideals. She asked 5 polite questions, and by the end he was weeping softly into a fig tart, questioning the point of moral asceticism when laughter existed. She loves metaphor. Her favorite? Politics is a serpent's dance, slow, silent, and guaranteed to leave you with a few bites. In court, she speaks in layers. The literal, the poetic, and the dangerous. One moment, she's praising the Nile's abundance. The next, she's suggesting that Rome's grain supply might be accidentally disrupted if her latest petition isn't signed. There's a rumor she once convinced a pirate fleet to abandon their mission simply by writing them a letter in flawless Phoenician, complimenting the captain's mother's singing voice. The letter arrived with a basket of lemons and an unsigned poem about mercy. They surrendered before lunch. You've heard her tell bedtime stories that sound like folk tales until you realize halfway through that they're actually coded warnings to her advisors. That tale about the jackal who trusted the jackrabbit? Definitely about her brother. And oh, the voice. It's not booming. It's not commanding. It's inviting. Like velvet dipped in wine and secrets. Even when she's furious, and you've seen that too, she never yells. She just gets very, very quiet. Like a storm deciding where to land. You once made the mistake of correcting her pronunciation of an old Syriac term. She smiled. Thank you. Then, 3 hours later, casually referenced your most embarrassing childhood nickname in front of a dozen priests. You still don't know how she learned it. Some of her sharpest barbs come in the gentlest rapping. She told a general he was brave like a camel, only to add, strong in the legs, a little slow in the eyes, but invaluable in dry times. He was flattered. He shouldn't have been. There's a scroll she keeps tucked behind her favorite statue, one of those long, rambling Alexandrian scripts full of dream interpretations. She's memorized most of it. Sometimes she uses lines from it in political meetings just to see who's paying attention. But her words don't just sway adults. You once watched her calm a room full of terrified children during a sandstorm by spinning a tale about the sky gods playing dice. By the end, they were giggling and asking what the gods bet with. Leftover figs, she said. Obviously. She doesn't speak like a queen. She speaks like someone who could rewrite the concept of monarchy mid-conversation and have you thank her for the improvement. There was one moment, you remember it vividly, when a Roman senator tried to trap her in a debate about imperial values. He spoke for 10 minutes straight, arms waving, voice cracking. When he finished, Cleopatra leaned forward and said, "You remind me of an ibis I once met. Very loud, very pale, always flapping near the good fruit." He had no idea whether it was an insult. She moved on before he figured it out. But it's not just what she says, it's when she says it. During a particularly tense meeting with emissaries from Parthia, Cleopatra broke the silence not with a demand, but with a joke about desert winds stealing wigs. The room cracked. Tension evaporated. Negotiations resumed. And yes, the joke was weirdly specific. You suspect someone at that table had lost a weight to the desert. You've seen her silence entire rooms with a whisper, win arguments with a raised brow. And once, during a drought meeting, she quoted a Greek tragedy so perfectly that the city council left feeling like they'd just been scolded by the gods themselves. And when she doesn't speak, that's when you really worry. Like the time a noble brought her a gift, a sculpture shaped like a beetle. She studied it silently for a long moment, then said, "How thoughtful. We were just discussing decay." He left 2 minutes later, pale as milk. Her real weapon, of course, is unpredictability. You never know if she'll respond with a proverb, a pun, or a prophecy. Once she pretended not to understand a phrase, made a Roman explain it 3 times, and then used it better than he ever could. Even the scribes can't keep up. Her wit moves like mercury, shiny, slippery, slightly toxic if swallowed wrong. It's late now. The library's quiet. Cleopatra stretches, yawns, and rolls over onto her feet with cat-like grace. "You should sleep," she says. "Tomorrow, I'm going to try negotiating with poetry again. If that doesn't work, I'll just set a mongoose loose in the war room." She grins. Words and wildlife. My favorite combination. It's well past midnight, and you're in the middle of a boat chase. Not a dangerous one, though Cleopatra could make anything feel like a performance. The barge rocks gently beneath your feet, silver moonlight dancing off the black water of the Nile. Papyrus reeds whip past in the warm breeze as musicians on deck play a slow rhythm on stringed lyres. You're not being chased, technically, you're just trailing our other ship. The decoy. Because Cleopatra doesn't arrive anywhere directly. No, she arrives. And tonight, she's showing you the art of the grand entrance. You're trying to keep up as her golden barge, a floating palace, honestly, glides ahead, draped in purple sails and lined with torches that shimmer like a constellation fallen into the river. Somewhere near the helm, Cleopatra is reclined under a canopy of embroidered silk, one arm draped over a lion-headed armrest, the other twirling a bronze mirror as casually as if she's not about to meet with a Roman general who controls the fate of Egypt. She always sails like that, the pilot whispers. Slow enough to be admired. Fast enough to be desired. And yes, those are real silver oars dipping in time to the music. Of course they are. This is Cleopatra's version of foreplay, political, psychological, symbolic. Historians still argue whether her infamous entrance to meet Mark Antony at Tarsus was planned by her or some clever advisor. But you know better now. Nothing is accidental. Not with her. You were there the night before she left Alexandria. She spent hours deciding whether to scent the sails with cinnamon or myrrh. She went with both. Let them wonder which god I smell like, she said. Then there was the headdress selection. Eagle feathers or cobra motif? She chose the cobra. The eagle watches, she said. But the serpent strikes. That's Cleopatra, not just dramatic, but precisely dramatic. The way she orchestrates spectacle is part statecraft, part seduction, and part survival. She doesn't enter rooms, she descends. She doesn't walk, she glides, even when barefoot. Especially when barefoot. Back in Alexandria, you once watched her stage an accidental appearance at a philosopher's lecture. She strolled in mid-sentence, carrying a falcon and a scroll, said nothing, and left again. The philosopher forgot his argument halfway through. To this day, he's still revising his theory. But nothing compares to the Tarsus arrival. You remember the reports, Cleopatra sailing up the Cydnus River, dressed as Aphrodite. Draped in pearls, reclining beneath a golden canopy, surrounded by maidens dressed as sea nymphs, with attendants fanning her and perfumed winds floating ahead of her barge like a scented omen. Antony waited on shore, expecting diplomacy. He got mythology. It worked, of course. Cleopatra turned the meeting into a performance, and Antony, a seasoned commander, walked straight into her theater without realizing he'd become a supporting actor. They say he invited her to dinner. She invited him instead, and served him gold-dusted figs and wine so spiced he hallucinated the Oracle of Delphi. Presentation, Cleopatra told you once, is just persuasion in costume. She believes deeply in the power of theater. Not the dusty, stagey kind, but the daily kind. The way a pause can command more attention than a trumpet. The way a glance over the shoulder can tell a man he's being tested. The way her palace hallways are slightly too long, so visitors feel they're walking into something vast and ancient, even if they're only going to argue about taxes. And it works. One morning, you watch her meet with a mercenary leader, grizzled, unimpressed, armor scuffed. She greets him barefoot, in a simple linen robe, holding a cat. No jewelry, no guards. He stammers his entire speech. She never raises her voice, never blinks, just listens, smiles, and hands him a single coin. He bows so low he nearly topples. But spectacle doesn't mean inauthentic. That's the key. Cleopatra never feels like she's pretending. She is the goddess she portrays. The queen. The sorceress. The legend. The human heartbeat under all that golden oil. Once, during a solar eclipse, she held court in full ritual regalia, claiming the heavens were acknowledging her decision to refuse a Roman tax. The local astrologers backed her up. Convenient timing, she whispered later, but I'll take it. You ask her once if she ever gets tired of the performance. Of course, she says. But I don't have the luxury of being boring. Still, there are quieter entrances. Sometimes she visits temples in disguise, veil pulled low, feet bare, prayers whispered in the local dialect. You've followed her once or twice, pretending not to recognize her. She never says a word, but the way she touches the altar, slow and reverent, tells you she's not acting then. And yet, even in disguise, she's unforgettable. There's just something about her walk. A rhythm between the hips and the shoulders that whispers, I own this place, even when I pretend I don't. One of her maids once confessed that Cleopatra practiced walking with jars balanced on her head. For posture? No, for control. So no one can tell where I'll turn next. In court, that skill turns explosive. One moment she's laughing softly with an architect. The next, she's risen, fluid, furious, and a visiting noble is apologizing for his entire bloodline. She once entered a treaty meeting riding a donkey instead of a chariot. When asked why, she shrugged. Chariots get stuck. Donkeys remember where home is. You think of that now as her barge begins to slow. Ahead, bonfires mark the riverbank. Soldiers line the shore. And there, among them, is the Roman. Mark Antony, leaning on a spear like it's furniture, already watching the waterline. He doesn't know what's about to hit him. You glance back at Cleopatra. She's adjusting her bracelets, eyes half-lidded. Do I have sea nymph energy tonight? She asks. You nod, a little stunned. She smiles. Good. Let's give them a story. And just like that, she rises, the gold veil lifting, the incense catching the wind, and Cleopatra steps into history, not as a woman begging Rome's approval, but as a queen daring a general to survive her myth. You're lying flat on the palace roof with a mongoose on your chest. This isn't a dream. Though it might be. The air smells like grilled dates and sandalwood, and somewhere below, a flute plays in lazy spirals. Stars blanket the sky, thick and flickering, and beside you, wrapped in a ridiculous fur cloak despite the heat, is Cleopatra, naming constellations with a half-eaten fig in her hand. That one's Sobuk's belt, she says, pointing at a cluster of stars that probably isn't a belt and definitely doesn't belong to Sobuk. Or maybe not. I make some of them up. You laugh, and the mongoose chirps. This is one of Cleopatra's lesser-known talents, spontaneous wildlife bonding. The palace is full of strange creatures, owls that deliver gossip scrolls, falcons trained to land only on politicians, a turtle rumored to be over 200 years old who lives under the bathhouse and bites toes that get too close. And the mongoose? That's Anubis. Named, according to Cleopatra, for his relentless death stare and unsettling affection for mango slices. You ask her why she keeps so many animals. Because people lie, she shrugs. Cats don't. She's not wrong. You've watched her interpret a diplomat's mood based entirely on whether her leopard purred or hissed when he entered the room. One time, she canceled a tree discussion because her ibis refused to land on the negotiating table. Bad omen, she said. Or maybe he just doesn't like their cologne. Historians still argue whether these animals were symbolic props, sacred companions, or elaborate personality tests in fur and feathers. But whatever they were, Cleopatra wielded them with unsettling precision. You remember the night she unleashed a pair of trained monkeys during a rather dull poetry recital. Just flung the doors open and let them scamper down the aisles with bells on their tails. Chaos ensued. Everyone laughed. The poets cried. Cleopatra applauded. That, she said, was the best verse I've heard all week. The truth is, wildlife is part of her seduction toolkit. Not in the obvious sense, no one swoons over camel drool, but in the deeper, weirder realm of unpredictability. A queen with a parrot that quotes Socrates? You remember her. A queen whose cat hisses whenever someone mentions Rome? Intriguing. It's strategic chaos. And it works. Once, during a tense visit from a Roman tax collector, Cleopatra entered the room flanked by two gazelles with gold-painted hooves. She didn't acknowledge them. Didn't even glance their way. But you could see the Roman sweating through his toga as the creatures stared him down like accountants from the afterlife. You asked her later what it meant. Nothing, she said. They just like watching nervous men. But the animals aren't just pageantry. They're woven into her daily life. You've seen her consult with her raven before meetings, holding up shiny objects and seeing which ones he takes. He's never wrong about bribes, she insists. And then there was the cobra incident. You were there, just outside the royal bath, when she calmly plucked a live ASP from a fruit basket and held it out like an unamused noodle. Wrong delivery, she said, handing it to a trembling guard. My grapes don't usually bite. It was a message, of course, left by someone hoping to intimidate her. Didn't work. She named the snake Philomena and kept it in a glass jar for a week before releasing it with a lemon slice. She was a good listener, Cleopatra said. She talks to animals the way other rulers talk to generals. With respect, interest, and the occasional bribe. You once watched her bribe a camel with honey dates to sit through a council meeting. It did, more patiently than most humans. There's a white cat that never leaves her lap during legal hearings. Once, it yawned at a witness mid-testimony and Cleopatra immediately dismissed the case. Clearly, the gods are bored, she said. A sacred ibis named Jed would follow her through the palace corridors, flapping indignantly at ministers who raised their voices. Eventually, no one dared speak above a murmur. The bird ran the room. You remember the day she trained a hawk to retrieve stolen letters. Took 2 weeks. The hawk failed once. Cleopatra didn't scold it. She read the letter aloud at dinner instead, to make a point. Loose words, she said, are feathers in the wind. An eye on the sky. Not all the creatures obey, of course. Once, her palace donkey wandered into a royal banquet, stole a roast quail, and kicked over a harpist. Cleopatra found it hilarious. The ambassadors did not. She rewarded the donkey with a wreath and gave the harpist a raise. She says animals keep her grounded. They don't care about lineage, she tells you, just warmth, food, and tone of voice. Like children. Or senators. Even her makeup routine includes critter logic. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Still in use. Smells like despair, but excellent for fine lines, she swears. And then there's the way she uses animal metaphors to disarm people. To a sluggish admiral, you move like a tortoise on laundry day. To an overeager poet, your similes flap like flamingos after wine. To Caesar, famously, after one of his drier speeches, you should have let the lions roar for you. That one made the rounds for weeks. Caesar didn't speak in public for 3 days. You once caught her coaching a parrot to insult philosophers in 3 languages. The parrot mostly said, "Nice beard, terrible logic," and whistled the national anthem of Rhodes. It was eventually exiled to a quieter wing of the palace. Probably still shouting insults at pottery. But the animals also reflect her core philosophy that unpredictability is a form of power. You can't dominate what you can't anticipate. And Cleopatra has made herself the queen of unpredictability, draped in fur, feathers, and silk. She doesn't just tame animals. She becomes part of their rhythm. You've seen her match a cheetah's pacing, mimic a cat's lazy roll, even croak back at frogs with eerie precision. She leans into the natural world not because it makes her seem soft, but because it makes her seem limitless. Human, divine, bestial, strange. There's a reason Romans whisper that she might be a goddess in disguise. And it's not just the eyeliner. The wind picks up. Anubis twitches. Cleopatra stretches beside you and yawns wide enough to scare a pigeon off the roof ledge. You know, she says, the mongoose is my favorite. Because he's loyal, you ask. No, she grins. Because he kills snakes. You both watch the stars for a while, warm and strange and comfortably silent. Down below, someone screams. Probably the turtle again. You're tiptoeing through a hallway that smells like cinnamon, cedarwood, and quiet treachery. The torches burn low along the plastered walls. Outside, Alexandria is asleep, mostly. But inside the palace, Cleopatra is still wide awake, and you're on your way to one of her stranger gatherings, the Midnight Parlor. An unmarked chamber just past the library, where the rules of rank, reason, and routine are gently paused. No guards. No court scribes. Just whispered debates, candied almonds, and people who think too much for their own good. Tonight's theme: power, passion, and poison. And Cleopatra? She's hosting it in a robe made entirely of peacock feathers. You slide open the door and step into what feels like an ancient wine cellar crossed with an art gallery. It's dim, smoky, and smells like roasted pomegranates and conspiracy. Someone's playing an oud in the corner, and seated on plush cushions are a handful of guests: poets, priests, herbalists, and, tonight, a Roman defector who swears he knows 3 ways to kill a man using only olive oil and envy. At the center, Cleopatra reclines on a curved couch, lazily dipping grapes into a bowl of what might be honey, might be wine, and might be something else entirely. "You're late," she says without looking up. "We already covered poison and moved on to passion. And just like that, you're swept in." This is how Cleopatra works when the masks come off. Not the public queen, draped in law and silk, but the midnight philosopher, the sharp-tongued temptress of thought, the woman who delights in pulling ideas apart just to see if they bleed. She leans forward and asks, "What's more dangerous, seduction or surrender?" Someone says surrender. Someone else argues seduction. Cleopatra just smiles and says, "Interesting that you think they're different." A small debate erupts. The poet starts quoting Sappho. The herbalist counters with a list of plants that cause hallucinations if brewed incorrectly. Cleopatra interrupts by casually asking the Roman what fear tastes like. He pauses, then answers, "Like burnt almonds and bad dreams." She gives him a fig. The parlor isn't just a game. It's where Cleopatra tests people. Here, knowledge is seduction, and ideas are foreplay. She listens more than she speaks, tilting her head when something surprises her, narrowing her eyes when it doesn't. Every sentence is a thread, and she's always tugging. Historians still argue whether these late-night salons were political, philosophical, or just Cleopatra being Cleopatra. You know the truth, it's all of the above. She lures people in with wine and warmth, then studies their vulnerabilities like a cat studying a sleeping bird. One night, she asks each guest to confess the lie they tell themselves to fall asleep. That night ends with 3 people in tears, 1 vow of celibacy, and Cleopatra casually sketching a new tax policy in the margin of her notebook. Sometimes she brings objects: an old Roman coin, a preserved scorpion, a scroll no one's supposed to read. She'll place it in the middle of the group and say, "Tell me what this makes you feel." Once, it was a child's sandal from a dig site near Giza. Silence followed. Then, a priest murmured, "It makes me feel like time is rude." Cleopatra didn't speak for the rest of the night. Just stared at the sandal as if it were whispering. And then there are the potions. Not poison, not always. But strange infusions. rose petal infusions that make your dreams run backwards. Tea that tastes like sugar but makes you forget your name for an hour. A syrup that causes giggles so intense someone once passed out. You try one, a smoky liquid served in a tiny carved jackal skull. It tastes like regret and firewood. You blink, and for a second, you're somewhere else, a battlefield? A wine cellar? A kitchen in Rome? When you blink again, Cleopatra is watching you. Did you see it? She asks. You nod. She grins. Good. Means it worked. You never find out what it is. Once, she brought a sealed vial said to be Caesar's cologne. The guests passed it around, and each claimed it smelled like something different. Rain on marble, ambition, a lie. Cleopatra didn't smell it. She just said, memory makes perfume from thin air, and moved on. It's not always heavy, of course. Once, she made everyone write compliments using only anatomical metaphors. Your mind is like a smooth femur, someone told her. She laughed for 10 straight minutes. But even the laughter has layers. Cleopatra rarely says what she means outright. She lets meaning emerge, the way a cat lets you notice its claws only after you've already pet it. You catch her watching a philosopher recite lines about eternity. She smiles, nods, and then, after a long pause, quietly says, eternity is just a word men invented because they're bad at endings. The room goes quiet. Even the oud player stops. That's the parlor at its best, a space where seduction isn't about bodies, but brains. Where power isn't shouted, but whispered and coiled like a waiting snake. She thrives in ambiguity. She asks unanswerable questions. She calls it dancing with fog. One night, someone brings up Antony. Is he in love with you? They ask. Cleopatra pauses. He thinks he is, she says. But he's really in love with the version of me he invented. I just play her better than he expected. Another long silence. Then she raises a glass. To all the selves we pretend to be until we become them. Everyone drinks. And that's the paradox. For all her calculated mystery, Cleopatra is disarmingly honest in these hours. She'll talk about loneliness, about legacy, about the fear of being remembered only for your lovers or your eyeliner. She once said, if I die tomorrow, they'll carve my face in stone and forget I knew 3 dead languages and wrote one very good poem about war elephants. You never got to read the poem. She burned it after reading it aloud. Some things aren't meant to last, she said. They're meant to haunt. The parlor fades with the stars. One by one, guests yawn, stretch, and melt away into the hall. You linger as Cleopatra stares at the embers of a dying lamp, the peacock feathers falling from her robe like molten memories. I like it when people don't know what to expect, she whispers. Then she rises, and just like that, she's gone. You're left in the warm hush of the parlor, wondering if the seduction was ever about her at all, or if, like everything else she touches, it was about showing you yourself. The Nile is moody tonight. You drift along its surface in a shallow, papyrus-lined barge, Cleopatra at the helm, wrapped in a gold thread shawl that shimmers like fish scales in moonlight. The air is syrup thick with the scent of crushed lotus, distant charcoal, and maybe, just maybe, a little mischief. There's no official reason for this boat ride, no ceremony or parade. Just a queen, a river, and something in her eyes that says, let's cause a little trouble. The palace is behind you. Ahead, Alexandria sprawls in darkness, with the lighthouse of Pharos blinking its colossal eye. You lie back, watching Cleopatra use her oar with practiced ease. Not a servant in sight. No entourage. Just her, you, and a boat too fragile for a storm, but probably fine for mild rebellion. Seduction, she says suddenly, isn't just about desire. It's about story. You nod like you understand. You don't. Yet. She continues. Everyone wants to feel like a chapter. Like part of something meaningful. A good seduction gives them that. A great seduction makes them think they wrote it. And just like that, you're part of her metaphor. This boat ride is a leisure. It's another scene in the grand Cleopatra narrative. You glance over the side. The water's glassy, a slow-moving mirror. You see her reflection beside yours, distorted slightly by the ripples, as if even nature is trying to figure her out. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra truly loved the Nile or simply used it. Some claim she bathed in it daily. Others insist she never touched it without scented oils and a full procession of crocodile handlers. But you've seen her at twilight, scooping water with her bare hands, whispering something that isn't quite Greek or Egyptian. Something personal. Possibly invented. She turns toward you now, eyes glinting. Do you know why I love this river? You shake your head. Because it pretends to go one way, but controls everything the other way. There's a pause. Then she adds, also, the hippos scream like senators. She's not wrong. A sound erupts somewhere upstream, half roar, half bark, entirely unnecessary. You both laugh. As the boat glides past a cluster of reeds, Cleopatra points to a dark shape at the edge of the bank. See that? She whispers. That's Heka. You squint. It's a man, barefoot, draped in linen, standing still as a statue. He's been following me for 2 weeks, she says lightly. Wants to sell me a curse. Claims it can make Antony forget me forever. You ask if she's tempted. Please, she scoffs. I already make men forget their wives, their debts, and their kingdoms. Why outsource? The boat bumps gently as Cleopatra redirects its path. You pass a cluster of floating candles, offerings, probably, or someone's failed love spell. She plucks one from the water, examines the melted wax, and tosses it back. Too desperate, she mutters. You never chase too hard. Seduction is about the pause. The wait. The maybe. She's speaking rhythm now. The subtle choreography of tension and release. You realize this whole river ride is paced like one of her conversations, calm, curious, laced with threat. She tells you about an experiment she ran once, invited 3 suitors to dine with her, separately, in the same room. Same food, same music. But with one tiny difference, she wore a different perfume for each. A week later, she says, I passed them in the hall. Each reacted differently. One flinched, one flushed, one recited a poem, and none of them remembered why. You ask what the perfumes were. She smiles. That's the fun part. All three were identical. You laugh. Then pause. Wait, what? Cleopatra's boat slides toward a little island now. Just a sliver of land barely wider than a market stall, covered in reeds and ruins. She ties the boat to a rusted post and gestures for you to follow. You step ashore. The island smells like damp stone and secrets. There's a low ruin, half of a temple maybe, its collapsed pillars covered in vines. Cleopatra brushes past them, barefoot, muttering soft phrases in Coptic you don't quite catch. She crouches beside a bowl-shaped indentation in the stone, filled with muddy water. Dips her fingers in, touches her lips, then yours. For luck, she says. Or revenge. It's hard to tell at night. This is one of Cleopatra's habits, inventing rituals. Sacred gestures with no known origin. Every motion is part performance, part puzzle. Once, she walked backward through a hallway just to unsettle a visitor. Another time, she spoke only in riddles for an entire council meeting. Nobody dared call her out. They were too busy trying to decode her like a sacred text. On this island, you feel it again, that soft disorientation she cultivates like a garden. Everyone thinks seduction is about being wanted, she murmurs, sitting on a fallen column. It's not. It's about being missed. People chase what echoes. The wind picks up. The moon turns the water to pewter. Somewhere, a heron flaps clumsily into the reeds. Cleopatra pulls a small pouch from her robe and pours a handful of tiny seeds into your palm. Eat too, she says. No more. You hesitate. Ask what they are. Clarity, she says. Or hiccups. I mix the labels up sometimes. You eat them. A warmth creeps into your throat, then your spine. The world sharpens at the edges, not painful, but noticeable. You blink, and the moon seems closer. Cleopatra is watching you, expression unreadable. Better, she asks. You nod, because lying to Cleopatra feels like crossing a cat in a maze. You sit beside her, silent, listening to the reeds rustle like gossip. She starts humming, not a melody you know, something fluid, like river speech. You close your eyes. She taps your shoulder. Come on. Time to go before the priest wakes up and tries to sell me that curse again. Back in the boat, the current has shifted slightly. She lets the river pull you both gently back toward the palace. The stars wheel overhead. Somewhere upstream, a hippo resumes its rant. You know, Cleopatra says as she rests her oar, I've never trusted still water. Too many kings float. You glance at her. Ask if she means literally. She shrugs. Both. The wind kisses your cheek. The candles float behind, tiny fading thoughts on the water. She leans back, smiling. If you want to rule hearts, remember, rivers change course all the time. The trick is to smile like you meant it. And with that, the palace lights come into view, soft golden lanterns blinking awake. You realize the boat ride wasn't an escape. It was a return. A perfectly timed one. Of course. The door to Cleopatra's private chamber closes with a soft click behind you. You're not supposed to be here. But then again, neither is she. She appears from behind a painted silk screen, draped in a robe the color of overripe figs, her hair wet and coiled like a sleeping serpent. The air smells of burnt myrrh and lemon balm. Her pet ibis, for reasons unclear, sits smugly atop a pile of diplomatic scrolls. Tonight's theme, damage control. You ease into a cushioned divan as Cleopatra begins drying her hair with a cloth woven from impossibly fine linen, rumored to have come from the Far East, traded for 3 jars of fermented honey and one particularly handsome eunuch. She sighs. This day was a disaster, she says, as if narrating the opening line of a children's bedtime book called How Not to Negotiate with Rome. Turns out, Antony had another brilliant idea. Historians still argue whether he was strategically bold or just emotionally compromised, but today he tried to secure an alliance by insulting both the Parthians and 3 Egyptian priests. Cleopatra spent the afternoon smoothing diplomatic feathers and pretending she hadn't just burned a coded message from a spy in Cyprus. Charm only gets you so far, she mutters, flopping into a chair beside you. Eventually, someone wants a receipt. This is what most people don't see. The cleanup. The clever backpedaling. The way Cleopatra steers disaster like a chariot with one flaming wheel and a drunk co-pilot. She smiles for the statues and winks at the senators, but behind closed doors? It's spreadsheets, papyrus ones, and dry sarcasm. Seduction, she says, is just how you open the door. The real power comes afterward, when they think the idea was theirs. She hands you a papyrus scroll, an intercepted letter from a Roman envoy. You skim it. In code, he refers to Cleopatra as the jewel of dust, the wind inside the coin. Poetic, if slightly unhinged. Translation, she says. He's in love with me, and also wants my gold. You ask what she plans to do. I'll send him back a riddle, she says. Let him dream about it all week. Mystery is cheaper than war. She sips from a goblet of date wine, then raises an eyebrow. Want to hear how I once stalled an invasion using only a mirror, a goat, and a basket of dyed scarves? You blink. She grins. I'll save that one for when things get really bad. The ibis squawks. Now she's pacing, letting her mind unravel the day's chaos. She mutters about a tax dispute near Memphis, the eunuchs plotting passive-aggressive revenge by mislabeling amphory, and a shipment of perfume jars that arrived already broken, probably a metaphor. And then, out of nowhere, she stops and says, "Do you think I'm too theatrical?" You look at her. She clarifies, "I mean, as a leader." It's not a trap. she actually wants to know. You tell her the truth, that maybe it's not about being theatrical or not, but about knowing when the audience needs the show. She considers this. Timing, she murmurs. That's always been the secret, hasn't it? She sits back down. It's why my seductions work. Not because I'm beautiful or clever, but because I know exactly when to lean in and whisper. You ask if she ever gets tired of performing. She laughs. Of course. But that's when you change the role. And that's the core of Cleopatra's damage control philosophy. Never play the same woman twice. If today she was the queen of silk and strategy, tomorrow she might be the high priestess of emotional meltdowns, tears included. Not because she's unstable, but because tears often move people faster than facts. Especially Roman ones. You know what Antony once said? She muses. I never know who I'm waking up next to. I told him that was the compliment of the century. She walks over to a cabinet and removes a small figurine. It's a lioness carved in lapis lazuli, no bigger than your hand. I keep this to remind me, she says. Power isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the one they notice when she's gone. She returns the figurine, then casually tosses a bundle of papyrus onto the floor. It unrolls, revealing a detailed sketch of a Roman villa, Antony's, presumably. Planning a renovation, you joke. She grins. Planning an invasion. There's silence. Just long enough to make you wonder if she's serious. Then she adds, invasion of affection, of course. The most effective kind. Leaves no bodies. Just memories. You smile, but her tone is steady. I can't afford to be just another queen with a crown and a temper, she says. I have to be unforgettable. That's the only way to outlive empires. The candle beside her flickers. You catch the glint of exhaustion in her eyes. Not defeat, just the heavy knowledge that brilliance is a full-time job. People think seduction is fun, she says, reclining again. And it can be. But when you're me, it's also strategy, self-defense, and diplomacy and lipstick. The ibis honks again. Loudly. Cleopatra doesn't flinch. Honestly, sometimes I think that bird understands me better than half the men at court. You both sit in silence. The room softens around you. The chaos of the day seems distant now, diluted by lamplight and the scent of mint. You ask if she ever dreams of just disappearing. No titles, no plots, no politics. Just off-grid. She considers. Sometimes. But then who would write the ending? You nod. The ibis poops on a scroll. Cleopatra sighs. That was an official treaty with Cyprus. She doesn't even get up. Yeah, we weren't that close. She stands and stretches. Her robe falls just slightly off her shoulder, revealing a bruise the shape of a thumbprint. You point to it. Negotiation, she says. Turns out senators bruise like peaches. She walks to the window, looks out toward the sea. They always say they'll stay. But they don't. So I make sure I leave the impression before they leave the country. Her voice lowers. Even when everything else falls apart, they'll remember me. That's the final form of seduction. Not attraction. Not loyalty. But legend. The air is still. The night stretches ahead, full of endings not yet written. You stand. Thank her. She smirks. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow's another disaster. But you both know she's already rewriting it. You wake before dawn to the distant sound of drums. Soft at first, like the Nile's heartbeat, but growing louder as you walk the palace halls. The floor is cool beneath your feet, and somewhere above, a falcon cries into the morning haze. Cleopatra is already awake, of course. She rarely sleeps past sunrise. Too much to orchestrate. Too many games to win. You find her in the north courtyard, barefoot in the dew, balancing a small jar on her head. A servant watches nervously. You stand there, blinking, trying to make sense of it. She spots you and grins. Balance training. For diplomacy. And upper body tone. You're not sure she's joking. The jar wobbles. She catches it without looking. All seduction is a kind of ceremony, she murmurs. And ceremonies begin with balance. She tosses you a jar. Yours breaks. Cleopatra laughs. It's okay. Not everyone's built for diplomacy. Today is a festival, an obscure one. Not officially sanctioned, but celebrated each year in a particular neighborhood of Alexandria, where the people keep hyenas as pets and believe dreams predict rainfall. Cleopatra insists on going. No guards. No chariots. Just her, dressed like a merchant's daughter, and you, deeply uncomfortable in your linen disguise. This is how I test the weather, she says as you walk the winding alleys. Not from priests or astronomers. From them. The people. You turn a corner, and there it is. The festival of the leaping carp. Not a single fish in sight. Instead, the streets are lined with painted pots, wide-eyed cats, cheap perfume, and dancers balancing trays of bread on their heads. A man walks past holding a snake and eating a turnip. Another hands you a fig and says, "Blessings upon your elbows." You look at Cleopatra. She nods. That's a good sign. She disappears into the crowd like a magician's final trick. You follow, dodging goats and overly affectionate children. Eventually, you find her bargaining over an ivory hairpin with a woman who claims to be descended from mermaids. Seduction starts here, Cleopatra whispers to you as she hands over 3 copper coins. In the dust. Among smells. With people who think they know what beauty is. She slides the pin into her hair without a mirror. Perfect aim. Historians still argue whether I love festivals for the attention or the intel, she says as you move through the crowd. I say, why not both? The air is thick with roasted garlic and incense. A juggler drops a torch and yells something offensive in Phoenician. Cleopatra pauses in front of a painted stall selling oils. You notice a vial labeled essence of crocodile nostril. She buys two. For Anthony, she says. He likes exotic aromas. There's music now, flutes and drums, and something that sounds suspiciously like someone playing a jar. The people gather around as Cleopatra steps forward. No one recognizes her. Not truly. To them, she's just a girl with confidence and a hairpin. Then, something remarkable happens. A boy runs up and shouts, "It's her! The fish queen!" Everyone freezes. Cleopatra doesn't blink. "Yes," she says, serious. "But only on Tuesdays." The crowd erupts into cheers, laughter, a few fish puns. Somehow, she's now leading a lion dance through the dust. Children mimic her steps. A woman throws petals. A dog tries to eat her sandal. You watch, stunned. Cleopatra isn't performing power here. She is power. In motion. In rhythm. She seduces not with glamour, but with presence. "This is my rehearsal space," she whispers as she twirls past you. "If they laugh here, they'll listen at court." After a chaotic hour, she pulls you aside and hands you a warm piece of flatbread. It smells faintly of cinnamon. "Eat. Trust me, it's part of the plan." You do. It's delicious. She smiles. Seduction is feeding people without making them feel hungry first. You raise an eyebrow. "Think about it," she adds. Later, you arrive at a shady corner where a man in a hooded robe tells fortunes using a bowl of dyed beetles. Cleopatra offers her hand. The beetles crawl into a spiral. The man gasps. "You will be remembered," he says, then drops his voice, "but only if you disappear in a storm." Cleopatra nods. Sounds familiar. You ask if she believes him. She shrugs. Even if he's wrong, it's good storytelling. As you walk back through the alleyways, Cleopatra stops at a small shrine. A tiny statue of Baudet, the cat goddess, sits among coins and melon seeds. Cleopatra kneels, places a single lotus blossom at the base, says nothing. You wait. Finally, she rises. "I once told Caesar I worshipped Isis daily," she says. "I lied. It's always been Baudet." She understands claw and charm. You return to the palace just as the sun begins its descent. Cleopatra washes her hands in rose water, and the day seems to fold itself gently behind her. She's quiet now. You ask what she's thinking. "Do you know what the hardest part of seduction is?" she says. You shake your head, making it look effortless. She tosses the ivory hairpin onto her dressing table. Most people think it's about beauty, but it's not. It's about attention, and timing, and misdirection. You don't seduce someone by being perfect. You seduce them by making them look and then making them wonder why they can't look away. She smiles softly, and you don't just do it to lovers. You do it to crowds, to cities, to history itself. She removes the second bottle of essence of crocodile nostril, uncorks it, and sniffs. Her face contorts. Oh, gods, that's awful. You both laugh. But underneath, you see the machine still whirring. The part of Cleopatra that's always calculating, always rehearsing. Even now, amid laughter and linen and beetle omens, she's sculpting perception like wet clay. Maybe, she says slowly, I'll name my next perfume legend. You ask what it would smell like. She grins. Doubt, with a hint of panic. You sit together by the window, the festival music fading behind you, the sky bleeding into plum. And she says, seduction ends not when they kiss you, but when they remember you after they shouldn't. Then she rises and leaves the room. No goodbyes. Just a trail of lotus scent and a single beetle on the windowsill. You're half asleep when the summons comes. A servant, nervous, sweating, ushers you into Cleopatra's war room. Yes, it's called a war room. Yes, there's a leopard skin chair in the corner. No, you don't ask why a scroll titled Love Letters and Naval Formations sits on the desk. Cleopatra stands at the center, surrounded by advisors, but no one speaks until she does. She's dressed in a deep green robe, the color of olive groves during flood season, and she's twirling a stylus like she might throw it at someone. Probably already has. You clear your throat. She turns, eyes sharp. Good. You're awake. We're seducing an entire island today. Okay. She waves the others away, walks you to the map table, and taps Cyprus. Roman sympathizers. Weak leadership. Gorgeous coastline, she says. If we play it right, we don't need ships. We need style. You frown. Style? Cleopatra smiles, like you just asked whether water was wet. Yes. I'm sending them a diplomat. And by diplomat, I mean a dance troupe for camels, a rare parrot that sings tragic poetry, and my second best poet dressed as a merchant. Subtle. This, apparently, is Plan A. Historians still argue whether this kind of theater was genius diplomacy or pure madness, she says, spreading her arms wide. But Cyprus is bored. And boredom is the soft underbelly of conquest. It's not always the sword. Sometimes it's a story, whispered sweetly in the right ears. You ask why not just send gold. She shrugs. Gold buys loyalty. But mystery buys curiosity. Curiosity lingers. You glance at the table again. Nestled between military rosters and spice charts is a single papyrus with 3 brush strokes, a swan, a snake, and a woman's silhouette. What's this? You ask. She lifts the paper with a sigh. A riddle I'm sending their chieftain. I want him confused for at least 4 days before my envoy arrives. Confusion makes people hopeful. She leans in. Here's what no one teaches you about seduction. It thrives in the gaps between certainty. That breathless moment between expectation and fulfillment, that's where I live. You sit as she pours pomegranate wine into 2 cups. I once seduced a general using only silence, she says, handing you one. 3 dinners. No words. Just glances. He declared allegiance to me before dessert. You're skeptical. She smirks. It helps if you have a tiger in the dining room. Pause. Wait, what? Long story, she says. But very effective. You sip the wine. Tart and rich. Cleopatra takes a scroll from a lacquered box, unrolling it slowly. It's a list of nobles, diplomats, and their known vices. Some prefer sweetmeats. Some prefer flattery. A few prefer to be insulted, which is a niche path, but she's ready. You read a name. This one says, only trusts women over 60 who speak Aramaic and own birds. Cleopatra nods. Perfect. I'll send Aunt Theoris. She owns 6 parrots and hasn't smiled since Caesar died. You ask how much of this is real strategy and how much is just, well, flair. She places a hand on your shoulder. Does it matter? If they bow, whether from fear or fascination, the bow is the same. A servant enters with a tray of scrolls. Cleopatra flips through them like a card shark, some from her spies, some from potential enemies, one with lipstick kisses instead of a seal. Oh, she's dramatic, Cleopatra mutters, tossing that one aside. I'll keep her close. And that's another secret. Cleopatra doesn't push people away when they're chaotic. She draws them in, uses their unpredictability as a mirror. Makes them think she's the only stable choice in the room. I don't need to outsmart everyone, she says. I just need to be the axis. The calm in the center. She walks over to a window, pulling back the curtain just enough to let in the fading afternoon sun. Remember the leopard chair? She asks suddenly. You nod. It belonged to a woman who tried to poison me. Failed, obviously. I made her my fashion advisor for 2 months. She learned more about loyalty in those 8 weeks than she did her entire life. This is Cleopatra's version of mercy. Keep your enemies busy dressing you. She returns to the table and points to a new map, this one not of land, but of influence. Dotted lines connect names. Circles radiate from cities. At the center, a tiny lotus. Her. Everyone wants something, she says. The trick is making you the path to it. You lean closer. One name is circled 3 times. Rome, she says flatly. You ask if she's still seducing it. She chuckles. Always. Not the Senate. Not the generals. The idea of Rome. You have to romance the myth as much as the man. She hands you another scroll. It's blank. What's this? My speech, she says. For the envoy to Cyprus. Haven't written it yet. But I'll dream it tonight. Dreams always edit better than scribes. The sun is almost set. Cleopatra exhales. Today we plant confusion. Tomorrow it blooms into loyalty. The next day, they call it love. You point out that it sounds manipulative. She doesn't deny it. But what is love if not a kind of surrender? She asks softly. And what is surrender if not beautifully timed? There's no arrogance in her tone, just observation. You ask if it ever feels lonely, charming everyone, but trusting no one. She tilts her head. It's not lonely when you know the dance steps. A long pause. Then she adds, but yes. Sometimes, I wish someone would seduce me without a motive. You're not sure how to respond. So you don't. She picks up the brush again and paints another silhouette, this one different. Not a woman or a swan. Just a shape impossible to name. Maybe that's what I'm waiting for, she says, setting it down. Something I can't predict. You rise to leave. She stops you. One last thing, she says, handing you a sealed letter. If the envoy fails, give this to the chieftain of Cyprus. You glance at the seal. A scarab. What does it say? You ask. She smiles. Just a recipe for roasted garlic lamb with one special ingredient. She winks. Mystery. You're in the bath when the news comes. The water, infused with crushed rose petals and a suspicious hint of cinnamon, ripples gently as a eunuch whispers through the curtain, he's on the boat. You don't ask who. You already know. Mark Antony, the Roman, the general, the last major player in Cleopatra's long, complicated opera of power, politics, and pheromones. And now, he's here, sailing upriver like a prophecy in leather sandals. You wrap yourself in a towel and dash through the corridor like someone late for a date with history. Cleopatra is already by the window, watching the royal harbor. Her dress, gold-threaded, sea blue, shimmers like water. She doesn't look at you. Describe the boat, she says. You peer out. It's enormous. Gilded. Carved figures along the hull. Purple sails billowing dramatically like they were paid to be extra. Musicians on the deck. Peacocks tied to the railings. Too much, you ask. She raises an eyebrow. Not enough. You glance over. She's already applied kohl to her eyes, sharper than a dagger's kiss. I need the perfume, she murmurs. The one that smells like thunderstorms and regret. You hand it over. This, she explains as she applies it, is her final seduction. Not just of a man, but of fate, of legacy, of whatever gods are still paying attention. Historians still argue whether Antony was the love of my life, she says as she clasps a necklace made from lapis and tiny golden bees. But he was the performance of a lifetime. The procession begins. Drums throb. Trumpets wail. You follow Cleopatra down the palace steps. She walks slowly, regally, as if time itself should stop and watch her. And, to be fair, it kind of does. The dock is packed. Nobles fanning themselves dramatically. scribes pretending not to eavesdrop. One guy clearly just here for the snacks. Antony steps onto the marble. He's taller than you expected. Sun-darkened. Scars on his arms. He grins like someone who's been in too many fights and won just enough of them to think he's charming. Cleopatra doesn't smile. Not yet. They stand face to face. Neither speaks. The crowd holds its breath. Then she says, softly, "You're late." He laughs, and you swear the Nile swells slightly. Later, you find yourself perched awkwardly at the edge of a banquet designed to look spontaneous. There are figs stuffed with honeyed almonds, grilled quail and date glaze, something involving lotus root and overly ambitious garnish. Cleopatra and Antony sit together, close but not touching. She tells a story about how she once convinced a Syrian warlord that she could talk to dolphins. Antony counters with a tale about stealing a tiger cub from a Persian prince's garden. They're laughing too much. You note the pattern, seduction through shared absurdity. Then Cleopatra does something subtle, you nearly miss it. She places her cup on the table, tilting it slightly toward Antony's. An open invitation. A symbolic spill. He mirrors the motion. Their cups touch. Barely. You might as well sound a gong. Cleopatra leans in. Most think seduction is about approach, she says to you later, in a whisper. But it's about the pause, the moment between gesture and response. You ask how she knows he's not just another Roman trying to use her. She answers without hesitation, because I already decided what I'll let him take. A strange sort of power. In the days that follow, Antony remains. His sandals leave a trail through the palace halls. He trains in the courtyard, sparring with local guards, clearly showing off. Cleopatra watches, expression unreadable. He gives her a dagger once used by Alexander's supposed cousin. She gives him a falcon trained to gnaw on cue. Seduction escalates. They gamble, nuts and ivory dice and impossible dares. She bets him he can't stay sober through one of her dinners. He loses. Repeatedly. You witness a new kind of dance now. Less calculated. More chaotic. They speak in coded phrases. They tease. They test. You realize that Antony, for all his strength, wants to be seen, and Cleopatra, for all her brilliance, wants to be understood. One night, Cleopatra confides, he's different. He blushes when I outsmart him. You note she says this while casually solving a 4-line Greek riddle and applying eyeliner. She paces the moonlit terrace. I won Caesar with spectacle. I win Antony with ruin. He likes me flawed. Sharp edges. Unfiltered truths. You glance around. Isn't that risky? She nods. That's the point. There's a moment of silence. Then she adds, I think I'm seducing myself through him. Now that's confusing, but also strangely beautiful. And here's your odd historical tidbit for the night. Cleopatra once staged a fake marketplace just to test how Antony would react if all the merchants pretended to ignore him. He thought it was hilarious. Later that night, they ended up in the royal library trying to one-up each other with misattributed Aristotle quotes. She won. Obviously. Still, there's unease beneath the laughter. You overhear a tense conversation between Cleopatra and her advisor, Charmian. Rome watches. Charmian warns. They see this union as provocation. Cleopatra replies, calm as ever, let them. If they're watching me, they're not watching themselves fall apart. Later, when she's alone, Cleopatra murmurs, love is the deepest disguise. You ask if that's a quote. She smiles. No. Just something I'll let historians fight over. Then, as if summoned by memory, she pulls a small wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside, a pair of Caesar's laurel leaves. Dried. Fragile. She touches them gently. You never stop performing. Even after they're gone. She sets the box aside. Outside, Antony calls her name, badly sung, slightly drunk. She rolls her eyes. He's a walking disaster. I might marry him. You ask if that's wise. She walks to the mirror, adjusts a hairpin, and says softly, not all seductions are meant to end in victory. Some are meant to end in memory. And tonight, you understand. Cleopatra is not just seducing a man. She's seducing time, the very idea of being forgotten. You leave her balcony with the image of her silhouetted against torchlight, laughing faintly as Antony serenades her from the garden with a borrowed lute and a very questionable melody. And you know, somehow, that long after both are gone, this moment will echo. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The night settles now, like a soft shawl wrapped around the shoulders of your thoughts. You're still here, barely, but you're breathing slower. The edges of the world blur. Cleopatra's voice fades into the murmurs of river reeds and distant torches flickering against temple walls. You feel them more than you see them now. The clamor of politics, the games of seduction, the glint of gold and silk all melt into the quiet hum of sleep's approach. You think of silver perfume and painted ships, of scrolls left open just enough to be misunderstood. And somewhere, maybe far from here, a parrot sings tragic poetry into the desert wind. Don't rush away from this moment. Let your thoughts float, like one of her lotus boats, carried gently by the Nile's hush. Maybe you remember a laugh, a line, a glance across a banquet table, or maybe nothing at all, just the warm sense that once you were there, in her orbit, a witness to the last breath of a world that dared to love too boldly. There's no need to understand it all. Just rest in it. Let the stories rearrange themselves behind your eyelids. Let the background hum grow softer. Let Cleopatra vanish, not in fire or ruin, but into the folds of sleep and dream. And know this, somewhere in history, in memory, in myth, she's still dancing on a marble floor, barefoot, daring the world to keep up. Good night. Sweet dreams.